Welcome to a Taste of Training. My name is Michael Phillips. I'm a Red Hat certified architect, and I used to be a Red Hat instructor. In fact, for the last 10 years, I was teaching Red Hat classes up until May, right? In May, I joined the curriculum team. I'm now one of the DevOps curriculum developers. But this training, the Taste of Training, is going to be on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. Some of the new features, right? New features that you would see if you decide to start using this. Gives you an idea of what some of our training happens to be like. So let's take a look at some of the topics that I'm going to be hitting or touching on during this presentation. So during this presentation, we'll talk about some of the new Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 features. It's going to be kind of a high-level overview, and quite honestly, this is going to be a good place where you might go through and take a look at the release notes for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. But in particular, we'll focus on some neat things, right? So how software packaging has been re-engineered, some upgrades that Yum has had. Containers, right? So how is the new redesigned tool set, which is now available in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, how does that help you out? We'll talk about how you might use the web console, right, as a way of administering systems. So again, some neat features that are here. Image building. Right, so one of the things that you'll probably have to do from time to time is create new images. How you go about that, you can still go through traditional methods, but there's a composer method that you can use within Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, and so we'll talk about that briefly. And at the end, we'll talk about some of the reasons why you might start using Wayland instead of X11. So these are some of the ideas, and I mentioned I was an instructor for 10 years. Some of the things that I used to have to do as an instructor was to get on to sales scoping calls. We had customers, or a customer would go to a salesperson and they'd say, and this happened between RHEL 5 to RHEL 6, RHEL 6 to RHEL 7, now RHEL 7 to RHEL 8. But the customer would say, I really want to find out some of the things that are just different between the two major versions. Between RHEL 6 to RHEL 7, and between 5 to 6 and 6 to 7, we didn't actually have a class that handled that, okay? And so as an instructor, I would have to take a look at, well, we've got certain pieces that are handled in sysadmin 1 that are a little bit different, or in our sysadmin 2 class, or maybe our sysadmin 3 class, and we'd start pulling little pieces here and here, from this class to that class to try to create something that would give our customer, a good idea of some of the things that were really different between the two major versions. And so with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, we do actually have a class, right? So there's a class, RH354, and it deals with some of these main differences or new features that show up in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. And so this taste of training gives you an idea of some of that class, right? I mean, this obviously, as a workshop like this, you don't have access to the hands-on labs. But in the classroom, our classrooms very much do, right? So our classrooms are very hands-on oriented. So again, what I'm going to do or kind of talk about in this presentation, some of the neat things that you would experience with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. So these first couple of slides, I want you to keep in mind that it's really just kind of some bullet points. Because if you look at the release notes for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, there are a bunch of new features. These couple of slides just highlight some of them. Now, I want you to be aware as we move on to some of the other topics, I'm going to start showing some demonstrations of these items. But, in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, there's some additional supported architectures. And so we have ARM version 8. Right? So 64-bit for ARM is supported. IBM Power, right? Little Endian happens to be supported. Of course, you continue to have support for your traditional x86 architecture, IBM Z Power, right? So these are still supported, but we've got some extra supported architectures as well. Installation, right? So installation is a little bit different. I mean, pretty darn similar when you look at if you were to go through a manual installation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 versus Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. But there is a distinction, right? We have two different channels now for software, and the base OS channel, this particular channel, it's providing the core set of operating system functionality. The AppStream channel, this happens to provide user space applications, right? Runtime languages, databases. So during an installation, you don't really care, but it has actually broken it up into two different channels. Something else that we get in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 is you can specify a system purpose. Oh, what is that, right? So you can flag and say, oh, this is a development machine. This is a machine with self-support, and it can help choose the appropriate subscription for the machine that you're getting installed. There's lots of different functionality around kernel, memory, KDump. So 52-bit physical addressing happens to be available, 5-level paging, control group version 2, early KDump. With KDump in the past, if you were having some kernel crashes, sometimes KDump wasn't started early enough in the process to capture that information. So it started much earlier now and can be really helpful in cases where your kernel is crashing. There's a deadline process scheduler. You can configure it, configure separate time namespaces. Other things that are available, firewall and NTP changes. So, since Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, you may or may not have been using FirewallD, but you should know that in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, NF tables replaces IP tables and EB tables. Now, if you're still using IP tables, there are transition tools available for you. If you've been using FirewallD, FirewallD works seamlessly with NF tables. So you wouldn't see a change there if you're using FirewallD, but in the back end, it is doing something different. Cronny, right? So cronnyD is replacing NTPD. Again, it was available in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. You may have started using that, but it has fully replaced NTPD now in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. Some new storage features in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. We've got the Stratus Storage Manager. We've got Virtual Data Optimizer, or VDO. Stratus, it reminds me quite a bit of Logical Volume Management. It has the ability to create pools out of one or more block devices, okay? And within those pools, it has the ability to create dynamic, flexible file systems out of those pools. So again, to me, very, very similar in some ways to Logical Volume Management. VDO, on the other hand, it's really pretty cool in helping to reduce data footprint, and it's really doing this in 3 different stages. The different stages that VDO is doing a zero block elimination. It's doing deduplication of redundant blocks, and then it's going ahead and using data compression. So it's something that you might end up using, right? But it's, in my opinion, it's a pretty cool feature. There's been security upgrades, right? So there's a system-wide crypto policy for TLS, IPsec, SSH, DNSSEC, Kerberos. There's a command, update crypto policies, that could be run. There's also been updated packages for audit, rsyslog, OpenSSH, OpenSCAP. So again, these are just some of the highlights. You guys, I know that this little source URL that's down at the bottom of this slide is pretty tiny, but really just go to the release note. If you go to the release notes for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, it's going to talk about this plus a lot more. And so these are some of the new features that are being talked about quite a bit. Let's jump into some other components. So